Good morning to you guys, and for our dialogue on European federalism and European identity. First of all, you might ask, oh, well, European federalism, what is this all about? And let me just start with a quick quote. So let me just read you this quote here. I think between peoples who are geographically grouped as the peoples of Europe, there must be some sort of federal link. These peoples shall have the opportunity at any time to contact, discuss their interests, take joint resolutions, to establish between them a bond of solidarity to enable them to cope timely in serious circumstances should they arise. It is this link that I would endeavor to establish. So we might think that this might be from someone today, maybe related to coronavirus, who knows, but this was actually by the former French Foreign Minister Aristide Briand at the speech to the Assembly of the League of Nations in 1929. So we see that this idea of European federalism is quite older than our today's guests, our today's party. Yet this party did write something on that, and just a few months ago, one of your members from the European board, Mr. Joël Böhme, published an article on Europe Today with the title "Wanted: A Federalist Debate," where he, of course, talks about the coronavirus, COVID-19, and he says, "We now see how fragile Europe is, and when a crisis strikes and we aren't properly federalized." So, opening up again the question on federalism. So should we discuss federalism? How should we federalize Europe? And how can we actually do that? So there's one party, and it's actually a pretty young party in Europe that tries to answer that question. And this party has 5+1 challenges to answer. And one of them is the +1 challenge, reform of the European Union, and ultimately creating a federal Europe. To give that party a chance, so let me just give you a quick introduction to that party by showing you this short video.
Oh. Europe is at a crossroad, and we can choose the path that we want to go down on. One of these paths is easy. It's the status quo. It's the path that we've pursued for the past decades. We integrate a bit less, but it doesn't get us anywhere.
Another path is followed by several countries. It leads to a return to national borders and is marked by fear and intolerance.
It's the path of nationalism.
The path we choose is a rocky one. We will need to overcome our differences and our tendency to think only for ourselves.
But it leads to a clear destination. It leads to a more democratic, more open, and a united Europe.
If globalization has shown us one thing, it is that our future is linked to that of all Europeans.
Separate, we are small countries. Together, we are a strong union. We are one people. The Europe we want is a social, open, and democratic Europe. A Europe built on solidarity, where no citizen, no region, and no country will be left behind. A Europe where decisions are taken by people who are elected by all of us, working for all of us. We decide together, and we benefit together.
So this is the path we choose. A path of solidarity, a path of change, and a path of hope. The path that leads to a more united Europe for a brighter future together.
So one thing that is often mentioned alongside with the aspect of European federalism and of a federal Europe is also the aspect of European identity. Many countries share a common national identity, but there's also the question on European identity as well. And just this week, just a few days ago, the German Foreign Office even published a statement on Twitter saying, "Our European identity is shaped by cultural diversity and our shared values. It is important to strengthen this identity, and I'm happy about the many ideas that arose from this project, Daring New Spaces." So, without any further ado, let me just introduce you to our today's guests. So, from the party Volt Europa, we have, first of all, Mrs. Valerie Sternberg from Volt Germany, who is the co-president of the European Board. And I know you got the invitation, and it says Damian Böselager is going to join us. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but I'm very happy to tell you that the second co-president of the European board is joining us, Mr. Reinier van Lanschot from Bold, Netherlands. Thank you very much for coming to us and for joining us. And I'm very happy that it's such a short term. We also got a third guest, and I'm very happy to tell you that Mr. Paul Jürgensen is joining us from das Progressive Zentrum, who is the project manager in the Future of Democracy program, and who is responsible for that project, Daring New Spaces. So maybe you can also tell us a couple of things about your project and how's it going. So welcome to our little dialogue tonight or this morning, and I'm very excited to talk to you guys. Of course, and for all of our guests and also our colleagues, feel encouraged to ask questions to our guests and have a lively discussion with them. So thank you very much. So maybe we can start off with one first question, maybe to all three of you. Maybe I would say ladies first, Mrs. Sternberg first. What does European identity actually mean to you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having us today. It's a great pleasure, and also for introducing us so kindly. Actually, the video you showed is I think almost 2 years old, and I haven't watched it in a long time. So it was kind of nice to go back to the roots and watch this. It was filmed in Paris, and we were actually then voting on our first program as a party. So party program called Mapping of Policy. So it was quite a kind of historical moment for Volt actually at the time. But yeah, what does European identity mean for me? It's a hard one, because I find identity is always something that's difficult to grasp, but I think and it's something individual often as well. To me, it means that I don't feel any less connected often with other people in Europe than I do with my local community or at the place where I grew up in. Of course, so maybe for the background, I grew up in Germany near Frankfurt. I would see myself as a Hesse, although my grandmother, being a true Frankfurter, would not like that, because there is this old identity problem or identity battle, so to say, between Hessen and Frankfurt. And I mean, I think this competing of identities is interesting, but to me it definitely means that it's a layer on top. So I feel Hessisch, I feel German, and I feel European.
Okay. So how does our other guests see that? Stella van Lanschot, for example.
Well, I see it also. Identity is also something that's layered. So you're at the same time, I'm a younger brother, I'm a friend, I'm a boyfriend, I'm a fan of the Ajax football club, I'm from Amsterdam, but I'm also Dutch, but I was born in France, and Europe is an extra layer for me. So I feel European as much as I feel Dutch, or actually I might say I even feel most connected to my city, the city I live in. I think what European identity is for me then is the history we have together is one part of it, and the other part I would say is the European Declaration of Human Rights and the basic values that it stands for is something that I always find very appealing, and that speaks to me. I'm a lawyer, or actually I have a master's in law, but I'm not working in law. So I read that for the first time, and I thought this is what sort of the world should look like according to me, and also what creates the European identity. One additional remark I thought of when I saw your opening with the speech from 1929 is actually that it's not new at all what we are trying to do with Volt. But there are, I think, 4 major differences now in 2020 with regards to 100 years ago. And first of all, it's the internet. We're so much more connected. We can have this conversation while being in different places. The second thing is the amount of people that speak the English language enables us to have these type of conversations without needing to translate it all. It's also something we underestimate sometimes, because we sometimes think that everybody speaks English, but that's not the case at all, but a larger chunk than in decades ago. And the other two elements are, we stand on the shoulders of giants, people that have for the past 70 years strived to make the EU work, and with success. And because of that, we can build on top of what they have built already. And the fourth and most important thing why I think what we're doing is not new, but now more relevant than ever, is that the challenges we face are so much more than in the past transnational. The easiest example is climate change, but migration is another one, or digitalization, taxation of big companies. So these challenges can only be solved by a Europe that acts together. And I think for those four reasons, it's different from how it was 100 years ago. So sorry for that very long answer and sidestep. I'm also curious to hear what Paul thinks about European identity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. How about Mr. Jürgensen? What is European identity to you? I mean, you are responsible for this project, Steering Spaces, basically dealing with a certain aspects of European identity. What does it mean to you personally?
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. And also hi to Valerie and Reinier. Good to see you. I also have a question to Reinier, but I will post that later, if that's okay. First of all, I think to me it has a political, it also has a cultural dimension. The cultural dimension, I think, Valerie and Reinier explained that quite well, has a European layer, but it also has a very social and private layer. I identify as the friend of my closest friends, and as the brother, my sister, and so on. But I also identify with other German citizens in the way we were culturally socialized, and I also do that with European citizens. But I would say that also my cultural socialization is very much influenced by the United States of America. I mean, especially when it comes to popular culture, I am, and I think many of us are, very much influenced by the US. It's no surprise that we have been watching the US election so closely, and it has sort of shaped that week so much for us, because we're also culturally very closely connected to the US. But politically, I feel much closer connected to the European Union and the ideals it stands for. To make that a bit more concrete, I think when it comes to climate policy, when it comes to digitalization, I think the European way, as opposed to the American or the Chinese way, speaks much more to me. And this is what makes me feel European the most. And if I may, just one quick follow-up question to you, Reinier. You said the declaration you referred to is very central for your identification with the European Union. I was wondering, to what extent do you think these are European values and rights? Because you could also say, right, that these are very universal in a sense, and how you would make a differentiation there.
Yes, I would definitely say they are universal, but I think in other parts of the world, people would disagree with that. Maybe not in theory, but in practice. And one could also argue that we are not living up to the standards that we've written down in that declaration. If you look at the disaster and the disgrace of the refugee camps in Moria, for example, and on Lesbos. But I think it is very generally accepted. People, maybe not even being aware that this declaration exists, have internalized these values across Europe. So I would say they're universal, yes.
Maybe if I may add one additional follow-up question to you as well. Do you think, since you mentioned these four new things we have today, like the internet, faster connection with each other, also in terms of language, do you think an actual federation, like a European federation, might be more realistic today than it was maybe 20 years ago?
Yes, definitely. That doesn't mean that it will definitely happen, but realistic it is. I've been inspired to strive for this pan-European movement and put my life energy there because I had a professor at university that taught European contemporary history. And I asked him this question. So after the European elections last time, okay, we've had a success with Damien being elected. And we've also seen that the Eurosceptic voices are getting louder. So it's hard to ask a historian to predict the future, of course. But I did ask him, and he said, well, it depends on which side organizes themselves the best. But there are actually, but all options are realistic. So going through towards the federal, the federal path, as was also described in the video, I would say is realistic, and we're doing everything we can to try and make that happen.
Well, since some of our students are also joining us here, I really hope that I might, or my colleagues might have an impact on our students in a similar way to get more engaged into such things and doing something they believe in and they want to strive into. So you've mentioned the elections, the EU elections, and I was actually very well, positively surprised that that Balz gained 1 seat in the parliament. And also congratulations to your recent success in North Rhine-Westphalia as well, in the city councils of Cologne and Bonn and many other cities, also cities across Europe as well. Do those elections make you a bit more confident in future elections? I mean, we have upcoming elections in Germany next year, state elections, federal elections. Are you confident to be more successful in future elections?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the European elections were a tough one because we only existed for 2 years, and as a party, actually, as a registered party in Germany, we only founded ourselves in 2018. So we were really only there as a party for a year when we ran for European elections, and so that was a super big confidence boost, and it just showed that the budget was like, a fraction of what other people or other parties put into the European election campaign. And so this was really people powered to an extent, it was, so we had 400 people, I think, when we entered the European elections, 400 volunteers going the streets, handing out leaflets, really campaigning online and offline for months, and it paid off. And it hugely boosted our confidence, I think, and it was that for our organization, and to the outside it really helped us with gaining legitimacy, because there is no doubt that before we had that MEP, a lot of people a little bit looked at us as like the dreamers of a vision that is hard to implement. And I think the people that gave us their vote, and by that their trust during the European elections, just said, there is room for that. There is room for a vision in Europe, and I'm happy to try out something new and see what you guys can do. So especially now with the results in North Rhine-Westphalia, where we in some cities got 5% of the vote, that of course is a huge success, and I think great to build upon.
Also good advertising. I mean, you're now actually more visible than ever before.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe Reinier, you want to jump in here as well?
I would say we're definitely more confident, and two things I would like to say in addition to what Valerie said. First thing is that we have a lot of elections coming up next year. If there's one thing I've learned, I found out that there's always elections somewhere in Europe, and we participated in a couple, and we see that we learn from those experiences. And in the beginning of next year, we'll have national elections in Bulgaria that we will participate in. We have national elections in the Netherlands, and I'm fairly confident that we will get elected in a national parliament in the Netherlands as well, and then in March also in Frankfurt and other German cities, and in Spain, in Catalonia in February. So we will participate in many of these elections. And I think once we also reach national parliaments, it will really be a breakthrough for us, because the political stage is still mainly national parliaments, although a lot of the decisions that are made are actually made on a local or on a European level. But once we get that stage, we can really push our message a lot more. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing is that I think most European initiatives that were similar to Volt have always gone from top-down European perspective of people who only wanted from Europe onwards to become more federalized. But we really believe that politics mainly happens locally, and that so mainly happens locally. So what we say is think European, act local. And by participating in all these local elections, we're actually building up the cloud, and that's a new element that hasn't been done before.
It's quite unique if you compare to any other party around there. Thank you so much. And I apologize. I already know this for like a week about this because of Valerie's social media. She's taking part in that project, Daring New Spaces, of Mr. Paul Jürgensen. So maybe Paul, you could tell us a bit more about this project. What is it about, and how did you actually came up with that idea for
that? Sure, thanks, Sebastian. The project is called Daring New Spaces, and we're doing this project in cooperation with the German Foreign Office and the European Council on Foreign Relations. That's a European think tank that is also based here in Berlin. And the main idea of the project was that one major problem that we have as the European Union and as a European society is that we discuss most issues, even if they are European issues, in 27 separate national media bubbles. And what happens a lot is that we see some kind of a blame game where Brussels is oftentimes the scapegoat for our failure in finding solutions for the challenges that we are facing. So we think for political integration in the European Union to go forward, and for us to actually become a union that's based on solidarity, a common European public sphere is a very crucial factor. And that's why, especially now in times of the global pandemic, where we all have a very shared experience, a very negative one, but one that can also have the potential to bring us closer together, we thought it would be very important to use the current trio presidency of the European Union in order to give young civil society actors a strong voice in this process, to come up with very bold and very future-oriented ideas of how the European public sphere could look like in the year 2025. So we brought together different young Europeans from all across the continent, and they are currently developing ideas on how a public sphere should look like. And then we try to implement these ideas into the trio presidency and beyond that. But about the specific ideas, I think Valerie, because you're a member of one of these working groups, you can probably say a lot more.
Sometimes it's hard to find the unmute button. Yeah, it's an amazing project. So thank you, Paul, for that, and team. I'm partaking in the working group that's talking about how to create a European how to create more European civic cooperation, because obviously this is something that we think a lot about as Volt as well. And yeah, let me just pick up my notes, because there's so many components that we try to bring here together. But I mean, certainly the part of communication and having shared media that Paul was already pointing out is certainly one of them. I think what was really interesting, the conversation, so we had a conversation last night, maybe one step back, how do we actually do it? We are a group of 8 people, I think, or from really across Europe, Bulgaria, Poland, Germany, Wales. So really diverse group with very different perspectives, and I think that helps a lot. And we meet every week to discuss our recommendations and work on kind of questions of it. And the question I was dealing with basically my workshop partner here is making the European public sphere into something that every person in Europe can identify with. I think obviously super topical question also for us today. And one part of it is obviously what is communicated. So, you know, kind of the shared storytelling, shared narrative, for example, through more European public media outlets. I think this is kind of where Paul was going. I think the discussion we had last night, which I find super relevant and so important, is also to think of the how. So it's good to exchange, and it's good that, you know, in politics we have parties that offer so many different solutions, political solutions that compete against each other. But very often, and what we can see now in the US to an extreme, and I think in Europe it's on the rise as well, is kind of a divide of society and kind of stigmatization of the other that is on the kind of the other side. So in the US, it was obviously the Democrats versus the Republicans. And these two sides often really shout at each other and forget to listen to each other. So we were really thinking about how can we work against stigmatization in society? How can we make people listen to each other again and really keep communication channels open? Because in the end, democracy is something that is rooted bottom up. And if we as a society forget how to do these things, then there is little hope. So these are some kind of, let's say, more abstract or almost sometimes philosophical questions or social questions, but we also come up with very concrete recommendations. And I think one thing that we said that's definitely needed to create a European public sphere is for everyone to feel like Europe cares. And we only feel that when we have a direct attachment to the European Union. And we think that that is almost always provided if we are in need. And there is basically Europe that helps us not to fall. So, for example, the proposal here would be a European social security number, a European baseline minimum wage, direct local funding of projects, of citizen initiatives, rather than distributing things by the national governments. So here also we are not so dependent on the rule of law, but really empower citizens and build that strong connection between the EU and citizens. That's just a part of it.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned the rule of law, and just think this week Hungary and Poland are basically blocking this recovery fund for the coronavirus in Europe, and there's actually one question that often came up amongst my students that I should ask you on how you what's your position on these nationalist movements across Europe on the rise. And the question specifically asks, are you in favor of the introduction of the rule of law, conditionality to the EU budgetary process, and why?
Maybe this time Reinier wants to go first. Yeah.
Yes, we are definitely in favor of that. I mean, democracy is at the basis of what the EU stands for, and what should also be upheld in each member state. And different non-political judges are part of that. Free press is part of that. and they have been undermined consequently over the past decades in Hungary and Poland. So while they are getting a lot of EU funds, 6% of the GDP of Hungary comes from EU subsidies, and they have themselves when joining the EU, stated that they are in favor of these basic principles of how we want to organize our society, and they are not upholding it anymore. And that's, I think, has been a flaw in how people or how countries were allowed to join the EU. There was a standard that you need to uphold, but there was no rules for when you, after you join, start demolishing that again. So I am definitely in favor of that, and I hope the EU heads of states find a way to move around the veto that Poland and Hungary want to put here to block it from happening. In general, we would want to get rid of unanimity decisions, because just imagine that the people that are all in this call would have to decide on where to eat tomorrow, something small and not that important, and everybody could veto it. We would be talking for a very long time and might not even reach a decision. Imagine that when the stakes are extremely high and there's a lot of people who have diverging opinions. Unanimous decision making is paralyzing us. So in short, yes, in favor of connecting the rule of law to these budgets, and secondly, unanimous decision making needs to end.
I just want to add 2 quick points on this. I think the one thing is that is obviously, I think the EU is also struggling with how do you punish a government but not the people, and I think this is a super valid question that needs to be analyzed more. But for example, this direct funding, and also perhaps a direct funding of local communities can be a solution to that. Also because, I mean, we see now in Poland that there are these, I can't remember what they're exactly called. I think something like LGBTQI free zones. I mean, this is just horrifying. And if this is what is happening, then I think we need to take a very clear stance and say, this is against our values. And if you want to be part of the club as a community or as a government, then you need to uphold these shared values. Otherwise, you obviously cannot get any funding. The second part is that I think the rule of law mechanism hopefully is just a starting point, and I hope it obviously will be introduced very soon. But I think that should apply to basically what Reinier was saying, all human rights and democratic rights that are the basis of our, or that form the basis of the European Union. And I think here, I mean, LGBTQ rights, women's rights are part of that as well. So funding should be definitely conditional to these values and principles.
Thank you. Another question of the same student, I would like to ask you, following up on that. How can the vision of Volt Europa and its plans to reform the EU help combating or checking the rise of right-wing ideologies?
And if it's okay, I'll just make a start. I think this is such a tough one because so when we started. I mean, the video basically shows it quite clearly. To me, European federalism is not as something that, you know, I wasn't born and said, oh, I need a European federal government. Or even when I started to develop a European identity through traveling, through Erasmus, through just meeting Europeans and thinking, oh, you know, I'm pretty alike. So I feel actually pretty European because I feel just as home in Italy and actually in the UK and other countries than I feel in Germany. Lost my roter Faden. What was the question again? Oh, the vision. So the point for us was always that a European federal government is as a means to an end, and in the end, it is something that we need to really create a European public sphere. I think this is actually that is actually the end product that we want to achieve, now there is kind of low-hanging fruit. I think there is kind of people who maybe it's an emotional journey that made them feel like they want to support or they want to be part of a European community, or it's even a rational journey through academia or through just rationalizing what does it mean to live in a truly democratic Europe. Or if we really want to live in a truly democratic Europe, we need a European federal government that is totally accountable that we can hold accountable for its actions. But what do we do with the ones that cannot relate to us right now? And I think this is a super hard question because we sometimes start at different levels, and I feel like this is going back also a little bit to the stigmatization struggle that I talked about a little bit earlier. I think rather than saying we need to convince everyone of our vision, it is actually our responsibility to respect that people have different perspectives on this world. People have different views due to their experience, but keep the dialogue open and hopefully educate on what it could mean to live in a European, in a federal European Union for everyone, and how that could benefit everyone, but not judgmental in a way that we're in an open, equal conversation. I think that is very important.
Totally. You said we need public space or public sphere, and I think basically we have not many European media. Actually, we have Euronews, maybe we have Arte, and spontaneously, I don't know if we can come up with anyone else. Do you think there might be a chance for any future news media, for example, news websites or newspapers on a rather European level rather than a national
one? I would say yes. The time is ripe for that. If you have the dream of being a European media tycoon, now is the time to start your business. And I've actually spoken to some journalists who are thinking about it, and it has been tried in the past. But what it mainly has been, I think, is very political or very intellectual. And if you want to make it work, then it has to be cool. It has to be like the magazine that my mom wants to read on a holiday. It has to be the I don't know, European football magazine, the European music magazine, those kind of things that are actually more culturally related than purely intellectual or political.
I actually want to challenge Reinier here because I think the European tycoon we really don't need if we look at what Rupert Murdoch is doing to media in the US and in the UK. I hope we find a different way. So maybe Paul has a way of creating an independent media.
One of our policy fellows, his name is Johannes Hilje. He wrote a book about an idea of his, and it's called Platform Europa, so Platform Europe. And the idea is a publicly funded digital platform that is both a news platform, a social media platform, but also an entertainment platform. So sort of a combination of the European Netflix, Facebook, and news account platform. And I think this is a very smart idea for two reasons. One reason is that I think it gives it a much better chance to not become an elitist project if it also has infotainment, popular culture content on it. And the second reason is I think the big platforms we are seeing now, they're all struggling with the fact that they are very much driven by profit orientation, right? And consumers are more and more unsatisfied with this. So I think a publicly funded platform, although this is obviously a huge project, has a lot of potential, especially here in Europe. So if you want to find out more about that, Johannes Hilje wrote a book on this and is much better able to explain his idea than I am. But I think there's a lot of ideas coming up that, as Reinier said, are not only elitist projects, but have at least the ambition to reach a broader audience.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why that would work now compared to 30 or 40 years ago is that, so I'm 31 years old. If I look at my generation, for them, Europe has always been a given. I was born 2 months before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it does, of course, change a bit from where you are in Europe, but from at least my direct environment, people think Europe is just there. So whether older generations might sometimes have the idea of, okay, Europe, do we want it or not? The younger generation already thinks way more across borders and thinks more European. And that age group is now becoming bigger as time passes. And with that, the need for European public sphere increases as well. I had one thing I would like to add to the previous question of what Volt can add in terms of federalizing Europe that other parties can't. And I think that one of the cool things we can do is actually also help societies from inside out, because often it's just my, for example, Western European projection on what should change in Poland, but we actually also have Polish people within Volt who are also demonstrating against the laws that were recently instated to prohibit abortion. And I think that's a big difference, where because we really have the European nature of our movement, since we're active in each European country. And that's something that no party has. And the other thing that we should do to tackle right-wing nationalism is solving problems, actually, because the European Union has been a massive success, but not for everyone. And if we make sure that we really leave no one behind and make it work for everybody, then people will start finding out that if they want to gain control over their society, nationalism is not the answer, but actually European federalism is the answer. And the last comment is that in the Netherlands specifically, but I think multiple governments have had that over the past decades, there has been a lack of vision. So people say, I'm on a moving train that's called the EU. We don't know where we're heading. We don't even know what the next station is. And the most right-wing nationalists do have a story that I disagree with, but they do have a vision of that's where we're going for. And I think that what Volt brings is a vision that's 180 degrees the other direction, but is also an actual vision and a story that people can believe in.
Thank you. You've mentioned this media platform. In German, we might call it the eierlegende Wollmilchsau, an egg-laying wool milk sow. So I know that participation is a big point on Volt Europa, and that everyone basically can introduce themselves into the party if they have some skills they might introduce in that way. A friend of mine just recently became a member in North Rhine-Westphalia as well, and I also used to be a volunteer before I actually came here to Hong Kong. Do you think maybe you can even set up a media platform for Volt? Maybe that might be something. Not necessarily like a combination of all of them, but I think social media in general might be a future perspective, because that's what young people usually consume. They don't really want to listen to a very long debate or something like that, rather than watching to a 1-minute video maybe.
Just to clarify, your proposal is that Volt sets up a social media platform?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure I think this is our key competence, and I'm not sure it should be. We use social media as and actually not the right platform, but this is for many reasons. So we need to change. We are currently working on, I think, US servers or something. So we need to change that ASAP. But we're using social media to organize ourselves internally. It's like Facebook for companies or organizations. But yeah, I'm not sure. Like, so maybe the first one, I think we need to be a super digital organization to really be the movement that we aspire to be, to really decrease the hurdles, because I think as a society we move towards a hybrid of offline interaction and online interaction. And so if we want to pick up everyone, the single mother who would like to contribute but just has like an hour once a week in the evenings and so on, and basically would lose that time already by having to drive to a local event. I think it's very easy to integrate people like that via social media or through digital channels. But I think I mean, it's going maybe a little step further, so not concretely answering your question anymore, but I think in terms of like party interaction, or how we can create a democratic environment in a party that is based on really exchanging, really debating, or like creating a debating culture, it will have to depend. It will have to be offline and online. I think online is not enough. And I think there is a lot of miscommunication, a lot of emotionality building up if we only stay in the online realm. So what we can see every time is that we are human beings and we need social interaction, not just through the online, but through the offline. And to just give a quick personal example, I think it's now been obviously for many people all over the world, it's been since the outbreak of the pandemic in Germany that I haven't really seen the European Volt team, and it really gets on my motivation and on my getting on things, because it's what you need. You need social interaction. So I think it's super important, and I think as parties, I hope we can create digital infrastructure that will really make it easy for people to participate, but it shouldn't be the only thing to rely on.
Okay. So since we have some students here in our guests, so would you maybe like to ask questions to our guests personally, or maybe our colleagues here would like to ask some questions?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Or comment on some things.
Okay. Well, can I? Hello. Well, thank you. Should I maybe first introduce myself? Can you hear me? Can the speakers in Germany here or in Europe, can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly
well.
well.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Jean-Pierre Cabestin. I'm a French national based in Hong Kong for many years. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. You know, I'm learning a lot about a part of the world which I've left for some time, and no, I admire your intention to build a federal Europe, which is not a new idea. I mean, I remember Giscard d'Estaing and some people in the 70s were pretty optimistic about building something more federal than rather the you know, quite different from the reality we're having today, which is as you know, a confederation of nation states. But one thing you haven't explained very well, I mean, I would like to push you a bit here, is what would be the benefits of a federal Europe in terms of public policies, in terms of, you know, what can the Europe deliver to the people of Europe? And my second question, because there are links together, is you tend to ignore the national level. You want to dismiss it, but how would you address this national level, which is going to stay? I mean, I'm just taking the example of taxation. Are you going to move taxation to the federal level? And so it raises a lot of questions in terms of reorganization of the EU, not to mention opposition to the EU. But we need to convince majority of people in Europe that they're gonna benefit from this change, and not only the young people, but all the people like me. In the European Union, which is aging, as you know. So all people will have a say in the future of Europe as well. So here's my reactions or my comments to your very nice presentation. Thank you. Have they got this?
So it's hard to determine who will start. Valerie, are you okay if I take it away first?
Sure.
To start with dismissing the national level, do we want to do that in its entirety? No, the national level definitely has its value, and we do believe in the principle of subsidiarity, which basically says you have to deal with problems at the most logical level. However, almost everybody says that, but in reality, almost every political party says that, but in reality, what they call the appropriate level is often too low. Take, for example, 2 points that are usually always addressed as these things should be done entirely national: taxation and healthcare. Well, healthcare, we've seen with the pandemic that actually having a more coordinated healthcare would have been very valuable. And I believe that the national level is better at determining how the healthcare on a national and local level should take care at the front end, but at the back end of buying medicines together, it's way better to do that coordinated and together. Also because of the price decrease that will come from that. Taxation, for example. Multinational companies that also the one that I've used to work for have used the loopholes in different tax policies across Europe and across the world to pay a very, very low amount of taxes. And the Dutch government is what at the top of making this awful scheme work. I mean, it was recently shown in a study that the tobacco industry had about 9 billion euros that they did not pay in taxes because of this scheme for which they used agreements with the Dutch governments, and we've seen a race to the bottom there. So should all taxation be European? No, definitely not. But should we at least agree on a bottom level of the minimum amount of corporate tax that needs to be paid? Yes. And should we harmonize in some parts how we tax our citizens or companies, etc.? I think to some extent, yes. And then the other part related to the benefits. Yeah, I'm talking very long. Valerie, do you want to take that part?
Maybe you want to finish of what.
Okay.
I know exactly where you were going.
So the question consists of what really are the benefits of a more unified European Union, and do you want to dismiss the national level in its entirety? And I said no, I do not want to dismiss the national level in its entirety, and gave 2 examples, and then moved on to the benefits of a unified EU. And then I thought I'm talking too long, so I went to pass the word on. But I'm also okay with answering that part of the question. I think the benefits of a more unified EU, in short, will create a higher well-being for every citizen, because you can address these 21st century challenges when it comes to safety. If you look at the future of warfare, it will be very much cyber warfare, and that's impossible for each individual country to be a significant player in. If you look at the economy, the transition to a green economy is way more logically done within a more unified EU. And I think that's the part where the EU is already doing best. If you look at how to handle the injustice of how we treat refugees, but also the destabilizing factor it sometimes has for societies when they see oh, our government is not in control when there's so many refugees and labor migrants coming. But a unified EU could be in control and could prevent these injustices. Well, climate change is the most obvious example. In the Netherlands, it's said every household should stop using gas as a mode to warm their houses. But in Germany, they're actually saying, no, we have to move towards using gas for warming our houses, which is ridiculous. Yeah, there's a lot of examples I could give, but let's give the floor to Valerie.
I think what is important is that to kind of look at evolution and see where we stand as a society. And I think society has become very global because we're globally super interconnected through trade and other exchanges, and we face certain challenges, and the challenges should be tackled there where they arise. And I think this is the principle that lies at the bottom of a subsidiarity principle. So in the end, actually, I think some challenges are global and they should actually be tackled globally. It's just that we don't have a I mean, with the UN, we do have a certainly way of tackling challenges like with the Paris Climate Agreement, but it's not enough. So we have there more possibility of impacting positive change at the European level, and so the things that are beyond borders should be tackled there, and the things that are local, or the challenges that concern us locally or regionally, should be tackled there. I think equally the kind of thought of evolution applies to our thinking with regards to the national level. I think we are where we are right now, and to deny that we all feel to deny that we all still hold a national identity would be, I think, not correct, because I think the majority of people in Europe still have a national identity. So dismissing the national identity at this moment doesn't make sense. I do think, however, that this might shift, and that in the future, the way we think about nation states and sovereignty of nation states might be completely challenged, or will be completely challenged. And so we might perhaps move towards a Europe that is more regional, where we have regional representatives, for instance, sitting in a second chamber. Like if we look at the US, we have kind of a Senate where we have regional representatives rather than national representatives, and we have a parliament as a first chamber that is directly elected by the people, depending on the constituent or per constituency. And why do we need a federal Europe so Europe is more democratic? I think federal Europe is the answer for us to really holding the European level and European politicians really accountable, because currently we have something like a technocratic government with the Commission, and at the same time the Commission and the European level is often the playboy of national interests, like we can see now with the rule of law principle, but in many other cases as well. So I think, I mean, it came actually out in the Corona crisis quite evidently how people were fighting about the budget of recovery, even though it should be quite a non-brainer, and we should kind of take on the European lens and say, okay, if we are sitting in one boat, then we need to take a stance for what's best for the whole boat, right? And to do that, we need to empower the European Parliament. We need to get rid of the European Council, so of national interests pitching against each other, and instead create a second chamber, as I just mentioned, potentially first by national representatives, and then hopefully moving towards regional representatives that elect a European government. So the government is accountable to Parliament, and Parliament is directly accountable to us. And I think this is where we currently lack democracy. So I think this is why with Eurosceptics, I do empathize, I do understand, but instead of saying we now break it all up and we're fine with retreating into isolation because Europe isn't perfect. I would say let's build on what's there and make it better.
Okay, thank you very much. Got some. We actually have some feedback from our audience here from the chat. So, would you like to say something on the microphone, or would you just?
They cannot use the microphone. I can read it out.
Okay, you can read it then.
There are two questions from the audience. The first one is from Wolfsloh. I am a final year student of European Studies, German. I have some questions actually. First, is EU essentially democratic enough? Second, how would
I can't hear it. Sorry. Can you come closer to the mic?
Maybe I read it. So it's from our final year students, and
It's in the chat.
You can have a look at it.
they can look
okay,
at the
they can
chat.
see the chat. Okay,
Can you look at the chat?
can you see the chat?
Yes, I can look at the chat. I'm seeing it here.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I think the first question we just answered, right? Is the EU essentially democratic enough? No.
Yeah.
Not enough.
Second, how would you get involved as an individual in European politics? Yeah, I totally agree that there's a huge hurdle. And I think that hurdle is mainly created, not like, the struggle is that I think, first of all, we have still European, or we have national parties that are actually active at the European level and come together as groups, but they're very different. So, I mean, the Dutch liberals are very different from the German democratic liberals. Well, yeah, and then they're very different again from the Italian, if they actually exist. So there's like huge differences, and what would actually have to be the case is that we have European parties like Volt that have one vision, what they're aiming towards Europe, and not diverging interests depending on their national interests. I think that is the one thing. I think the second thing is more tangible in that we have a very static view, I think, in most countries of getting involved in politics. So you're either a party member or you're not. If you're a party member, then you pay fees, then you can also vote, but then you usually have to work your way really up into certain ranks, so you have a voice. All of these things. I think their Volt aims to really decrease the hurdles of getting involved in politics in general, not just European politics, and say we're a hybrid, we're a party and a movement. So also when you say, okay, I don't want to really be a party member because I don't want to forever be stamped as Volt or whatever, I feel more comfortable as just being a volunteer and standing up maybe also for some uber political, like super party political issues, like, I don't know, standing up for the migrants in Moria, like we try to do with Europe Cares, like these things. And you can just get involved in certain categories of initiatives that parties do, or just bring in your expertise where you feel like you can add the most value. And so to really become a more fluid organization where it's much easier to come up, and it really depends on your ideas rather than on how long have I been in the party to become someone.
Thank you. And we've got one more question here. Two more questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Time investment.
So maybe I should do that. In our section in Europe, we discussed the influence on Chinese investments in various European countries, which has in turn posed challenges to, no, I can't see the screen. To where we're at.
Pose challenges to the EU.
Taking a unified stance towards China, what are your views? How could we overcome this division? I also like Mr. van Lanschot's mention of a EU model to tackle issues like the digitalization that could come between the models by US and China. Could you elaborate more on issues related to technologies, sovereignty?
Yes, thanks for the question. When we saw, to answer the first one about the unified stance towards China, we saw, for example, that the investment in the harbor of Piraeus, it's a big example of the influence of Chinese investments. And to some extent, in the multilateral world that we envision, there should be room for doing investments in other countries. However, when they are used as a pressuring model for the government of that country to change or block a unified rule against China, then there's something going wrong. And it really shows how unanimous decision-making is paralyzing Europe and the EU, because the unanimous decision-making also when it comes to foreign policy makes it possible for Greece to block a policy that's directed towards China from happening. And that is directly linked to this investment. So it shows how we want to get rid of the unanimous decision-making. And it shows for me that we have been very geopolitically unsavvy, where the EU is an economic giant. It's going through political puberty, and military and geopolitical strategy, it's a dwarf. And if we have strategic elements of EU infrastructure that we let outside entities take ownership of, then we're not doing the right thing, I would say. And it's not because I want to create an us against them versus China, because I believe there is no them, but we should be wary of these decisions. And then the second point, when it comes to the technology sovereignty, it's interesting because of the biggest 50 tech companies in the world, only one is European. And it shows how we are sort of missing in that race or losing from China and the US when it comes to technological innovation. However, what the EU does do very well is that it's the only one that was able to make sure that the big tech giants actually start using more, or not using more, that they actually start respecting privacy law better. And I think that that's really where the EU has a force, where they can make sure that the downsides of technological innovation are being pushed back. In addition to that, I would say the EU has to double down on innovation in order to make sure that we also have our own technological innovations that are similar to what's happening in the US and China. That's why I think we say we want to double that budget.
Thank you very much. We have also a few more questions here. Our next question is, does your party's theme color purple symbolize something? Does it stand for something?
I think at first, this was the color that wasn't really used yet by parties.
And what does it mean?
Oh, and I've got a question here. What does actually volt mean? What does it refer to?
So we didn't want to go to an abbreviation like a lot of parties do, like Federal Democratic Party, or I don't know what. So we went for something that would spark like a certain association, and volt usually is associated with energy. So energizing Europe.
So next question here from our audience online. How would your party react if any country would plan to leave the EU, which was the case for France when there was speculation? Now it's like France may leave the EU a few years back when UK decided to leave.
Yes, good question. So we also have a volt chapter in the United Kingdom, trying to, it's a very, very, very long road, but trying to ultimately get the UK back in the EU. And I would say that one of the mistakes made in general when it comes to the EU is not being able to tell properly what the benefits of the European Union are. We see that national politics, when something goes well in the EU, played a big role in it, claim that success for themselves. And when something is awful, they just say it's the fault of the EU. And that narrative was present in the UK for 40 years. And then when the Brexit campaign was happening, the EU thought, well, this is national affairs that we shouldn't campaign about. And we shouldn't actively go to the streets there and tell people to remain in the EU. Well, if France would decide all of a sudden that they are considering leaving the EU, which is highly unlikely, but if they would, then we would join our French team on the streets and start campaigning for them to remain in the EU. Because I think that's something we would definitely not want to happen.
Thank you. Another question?
Professor Kohl.
Okay, Professor Kohl.
This Hi, I'm Professor Cole, Alistair Cole, head of department. I've got a couple of questions. I can't see very well because it keeps flickering on and off, so I'll speak in the dark, literally. I've got I suppose, as we say I've got a comment and a question. Well, I might actually have 2 comments and 3 questions, but let's keep it brief. And the first one comes, actually the comment, it's about the notion of identity. Because we started off talking about identity. And it's interesting, I mean, identity clearly can be framed in rather different ways. And do we understand identity as similarity, or do we understand identity as difference? Because these are 2 definitions in a way of identity that both stand ground, but the consequence of whether we define identity in terms of difference or similarity is actually quite important. Because to some extent, if we're defining identity in terms of similarity, then clearly we're defining the similar traits that bind all European citizens. And I think in a sense, that's the message that you're putting across, and you're doing it very well. But if we're defining identity in terms of difference, then I think, to some extent, accommodating difference within a federal Europe, ought to be, I think, to some extent, also one of your ambitions, because in a way, politics is based on difference. In a way, democracy is based on difference. Democracy is based on respecting difference, on respecting diversity, on people not actually always buying in to the full value system. So I think in a sense, and this is a problem, I think, for everybody who, it's not new, and I'm not saying anything particularly original, but it is actually a problem getting that balance between the particular construction, I suppose, of identity and how that, so and it's something I've been struggling with for years, actually, and then it's coming out in some of your very interesting talk. I mean, in a sense, on the one hand, you've mentioned storytelling a lot. No, I like storytelling. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I think you have to have a story. I agree. And the story has to be coherent. It's got to be, it can't be exclusive, but it's got to be sufficiently sort of directional to have a clear sense to it. It's got to have a legitimizing discourse, as Vivian Schmidt would have said in one of her books. So I think in a way, and it's getting back to this tension about can we reason in terms of a European identity that is sufficiently pluralistic and yet coherent to make sense. And if we do that, and again, I hope we can do we not put too much emphasis perhaps on the actual structure of, you're arguing for European federalism, and why not? And that, in a sense, is a coherent outcome. But is it not an emphasis more on the structure of what a European Union might look like than actually I suppose, the values or the public policies, as Kaplan-Stein was saying, or the tensions within that structure? So it's more a sort of think question, really, rather than a real question asking you to answer it. But I mean, that's the way I see these questions.
Thank you.
I just want to say something about the identity and something else, but I'll take also. Okay. So and something which was mentioned before. I think so far it's rather elitist. I mean, it's a very small part of the population who is really into this European thinking. And it has something to do, in my opinion, with language as well. Because like you mentioned before, not everybody speaks English up to a level where they can participate in, like this kind of discussion. And I mean, it's Netherlands. I mean, you're now here from Netherlands and Sweden and Germany. But what about Bulgaria, Romania, Letland, Latvia? There are so many countries and so many people who do not have the skills to participate in these things for whatever reason, But I mean, it's still a very, very small layer of people who participate in this discussion, I think. So the vision of like having like everybody, have taking advantage of the European Union might not be so easy. We have any idea how to solve the language problem? And
so much great food for thought. Yeah, I think maybe with the last one first, just my brief take on it. I think the European project, the EU project, the start of it was certainly elitist and might still be. I don't think the feeling European is elitist at all. If we look at our movement, then we have people from a very diverse background. Unfortunately, regionally not as diverse as we would hope for. We do have quite a strong Bulgarian team. We do have a team in Romania. There's many Eastern European countries that are missing as both teams. But like from a social background, it's super diverse, and I wouldn't say that it depends on necessarily also only the educational background or something if you feel European or if you want to work towards a European public sphere. Because in the end, with the previous speaker, I totally agree with that we tend to overemphasize structure and institutions. What we should talk about is a European public sphere, European community, not how we get there, because that's just detail and it's quite dry as well. So I do agree. For some reason, discourse always goes down there. I guess this is also depending on the circle of group, depending on the group of people that is talking about it, because I guess here as well there is a lot of experts on the European Union and its functions. So that's the conversation tends to go down that route. But in general, the narrative should not be around it. It should be around a European public sphere, which then goes into storytelling, pluralistic but coherent. I totally agree. It's super hard. I don't have any wisdom, I think, to share on that. I think the only thing that we can do as or which we have tried to do as Bold is to give the European feeling and the European movement a lot of different faces, to show the pluralism but still standing up for the same vision. So I hope that the unifying value or the unifying story is in the end the vision and the values, but totally pluralistic in the communication and the people that transmit it or that believe in it. But Reinier, maybe you have additional thoughts.
Thank you very much. The comments? Yes, can you check?
Yeah, I had an additional thought about only the small group being interested in politics, in European politics specifically. That's also my experience. I mean, if I talk to people about politics, then often their first reaction is boring, and then I talk about European politics, and their reaction is even more boring. But when we talk about the topics that the politics address, if you talk about climate change, if you talk about social inequality, if you talk about taxation, then almost everybody has an opinion. And I think that that's where we find that everybody is interested in how our society is organized and how we do certain things. It's so there is a basis to talk about this with everyone. Actually, I've worked in a supermarket for over a year, and all the employees and customers I would engage with would also have opinions about these topics, about whether climate change is something we should address and how, and the political aspect not so much, but the other aspects they do. And I just had one thing, which is the differences in a society and in life is what makes life beautiful and interesting. So we would definitely not want everybody to be the same. I actually think that an encompassing united Europe will be the enabler of such differences. And we've also seen that up to now, that, for example, the Frisian language, which is a small province in the Netherlands where they still speak a certain dialect, the schools that are still teaching that dialect are EU funded. And if it wasn't for the EU, then that language would probably go away quicker. So I think if you look at the EU sort of subtext, exploribus, or what is it, exploribus unum, in united in differences. So I would definitely want the ideal Europe we have to be one where everybody can fulfill their unique potential, and that potential is always unique. And yeah, that's what I want to say about the differences.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from our colleagues here, or maybe from our students? Questions? No? Okay. Then I want to thank you very much for accepting my invitation to talk with us. Thank you so much also to attend this event in such a short term, especially to Paul Jürgensen and also to Reinier, sorry. So thanks so much for being with us, and I'm looking forward to hear more from you in the future.
Thank you so much for having us, and I hope the conversation doesn't stay here, but everyone who's interested in keeping up the exchange, please always reach out, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody. And one last comment from my side, also to Wallace, who posed a question about getting involved as an individual. The easiest way is to subscribe to Volt. You can just subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed if you want, but you can also become a volunteer or a member, and you are more than welcome to join us, not only Wallace, but everybody who is listening in. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Bye.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.